start repeating, put
Okay,
your hand
I
up.
will. I'll tell you. But we were talking. This is March 4th now.
Right.
Saturday afternoon, 2:00. We're back in the home of Buzz Bensinger, and we sort of got on the theme of the topic of your education, and you talked about going to Dartmouth, and you talked about then being called into the Army.
Right.
And you got married to Jean.
Right. And while I was in the Army.
While you were in the Army,
Right.
but we never got to law school or any of that. So maybe we could start
with law school, or with the
with the end of your service, maybe.
Okay. Well, after discharge, at the name of the place, it's near Harrisburg. Big Army base was there. Anyway, that's where I was discharged from the Army.
Indiantown Gap?
Indiantown Gap, was that right? Thank you. Indiantown Gap. I was just there a couple of days. And that was the end of my Army career. And then I went back to Dartmouth for about a semester and a half, and left my family in town because they had two places to stay. That's Jean and Diane at this point, and we were they were staying some of the time at my parents' house. They had extra rooms, and some of the time at her parents' house in Stroudsburg. So that was no big deal, and I'd come home whenever I could, and then the Army said, you guys, they went to all the colleges in the United States and said to the men, you are going to have to do. We had a draft in those days. They drafted millions and millions of service people into the Army, Navy, and the Air Force was part of the Army in those days. And the Merchant Marine, well, they didn't draft them into the Merchant Marine, but people would join the Merchant Marine because they needed tens of thousands of people in the Merchant Marine. And they said to us up there, "Well, you guys finish college, and then we'll call you up, and you either go on in the Navy or the Army or the Marines and or the Air Force branch of the Army." And I had a pilot's license, so I wanted to be a flyboy, as we used to call them. And so I wanted to be active, and so they signed us up, and we went on for another. I already told that story.
Well, you told about the.
Then they called us up, and then we went in the Army, and I washed out of the.
And you washed out, and your mother was going to make you a plumber for a while.
Right, that's right.
Yes.
And anyway, I have to jump ahead now. Okay, so I'm finished my Army service, and I'm back at Dartmouth College, and I'm taking these courses, and suddenly they had dropped the admissions requirement instead of 4 years of undergraduate in good standing. And they take you for in some cases, some law schools said just 3 years, and some said 2 years, and I had 3. I would be finishing up 3 years, and so Temple University agreed to accept me, and at the end of my period, and I kept saying to the Dean of Admissions, the Dean of the college, his name was Neidlinger, that we matured quite a bit in the Army, in the armed services, and we did take some courses, and we got some credits for that. And I said I'd like to come back and get my degree from Dartmouth, because leaving after 3 years you didn't have a degree. And he went back to the academic committee of the college, and came back with a plan. Said if you finish law school in good standing in your grades and have them certified to Dartmouth, that we'll agree to send you a diploma. And they did it for. I was one of the first ones, I guess, that asked them to do that, and they did it for not just lawyers. Then they did it. They made it standard, and apparently many of the other graduate schools were doing the same thing because they needed lawyers. Lots of lawyers died in World War II, and would-be lawyers died, and so there was a shortage of lawyers at that point, and there was a shortage of other skills, engineers and physicians, so that they all suffered casualties, of course. So we went. That's what happened, and I went down to Philadelphia to live, and this was in the middle 40s, and first year law school was very tough. Learned to study very hard. I thought I'd studied and had some good background at Dartmouth. I took a course on constitutional law. I took a course in government and a course in accounting. And I think they were very good backgrounds for the law. And so I ground my way through and passed all the subjects, and even though some of them were really borderline, and then I had them certify my grades into Dartmouth, and then they mailed me a Dartmouth diploma because I'd even offered to come back for summer school after I'd finished law school and that sort of thing. But and a very important thing that we had too that we got from the Army service was a $10,000 insurance policy, and I think it was a $10,000 tuition credit, which went a long ways in those days. $10,000 did, and
this was part of the GI Bill.
That's a GI Bill. That's the sum and substance of it, and that was a good thing, a big help. My dad had helped me. And I worked a little bit in college to help the finances as well. I had a part-time job at the library, and and in the summer I worked in my dad's office, learned to search titles, real estate titles, and his assistant lawyer taught me how to do that. We abstract. There were no title insurance companies in the rural areas of Pennsylvania. Philadelphia had some title insurance companies. Oh, that you'll hear that thunder every once in a while. It's the snow coming off the roof, hitting the snow brakes that are over there. And so they in law school, one of the things I finally did, my grades were sufficiently good to qualify for what we called the law review, Temple Law Review. All law schools have a law review, and you write articles and you research them, and so you learn to do legal writing, and that was very interesting. The most interesting subject I learned and studied was it was about how artificial changes in the weather caused by man's activities would affect weather, and would affect commerce, and would affect laws and litigation. In other words, what happened about this time, a little before this time, somebody in a refrigerated room was experimenting, and some not chemists, well, maybe some of the chemistry, something chloride, I can't remember the name of it's in my article, but anyway, you pass sodium chloride, I guess, and you pass that through a supercooled air, and it causes what what they did was actually clouds, if there were clouds with enough moisture in them. And they experimented with airplanes and seeding clouds. They called it cloud seeding. Mm-hmm. And it was done by fairs out in the West, and by farm groups trying to induce rain and parch crops and so on and so forth. And the fairs would try to get the clouds wrung out before they came over the open fairgrounds and washed out the crowds with rain. And there was battles between states. Some of the states were saying California was seeding the clouds so that the rain would fall in the mountains of California to help their water supply. And Nevada and Arizona and New Mexico were suffering because of that, and so they had litigation over these issues, and because water is so scarce out there. And so I thought this would be a fascinating subject, and even about snowstorms, because I was a skier, and that we had been talking about skiing in the Poconos and skiing, and so I wrote this article, and they published it. And as a matter of fact, I still have a copy of that article. So that was my first thinking about how important weather is for so many activities, including outdoor sports and recreation. So
was Jean with you in Temple or
Temple? She came down. Jean came down, and we had an apartment we had two apartments. One was with a law student just graduated. He was my brother's very close friend, and he had a new house, and he had an extra room, and agreed to share the bathroom upstairs. And Diane, and that's my youngest daughter, and Jean and I lived in that house. In the development, we used to take the train. It wasn't a train; it was kind of like electrified car. Passenger car on rails, took us into the elevated and subway from West Philadelphia into Central City. Temple University Law School was located in the 11th or 12th floor of the Gimbel department store building, a great big department store on Market Street between Chestnut and Market.
Yeah.
And the whole law school was on one floor of that building. And one of the interesting things we did at lunchtime sometimes, there was a fashion show put on by Gimbel's up in this huge dining room. And of course, it was 99% boys in this, or young men, in these law school classes. So when we broke for lunch, we'd go up and watch the fashion show, and so that was interesting. And
where was Chud by? I mean,
Chud was going on. He was 4 years ahead of me.
So
he had Dartmouth
during the war. He went to Dartmouth and graduated as you were starting Dartmouth.
Yeah, that's right. The same fall. He graduated in the spring, and I matriculated there in the fall of 40. His class was 1940. My class was 1944, but I never got through any senior year, of course. But Chud was in law school, or it was between Dartmouth and law school, and he had been admitted to the University of Pennsylvania, which is a very, very good law school, and he had. Can't remember exactly. Was he interrupted in law school? I can't remember. But he enlisted in the United States Navy, and they gave him, because he had a college degree, they sent him to a training school in Connecticut for supply officers on these thousands of Navy ships. Supply had to have supplies of all different sorts, food and clothing and all the equipment they have, including ammunition. And so he took their courses and passed the test and was given a lieutenant's commission in the Navy. And he came home and married Babsy at that point, and then they had started having children too. And
but did he finish law school?
He finished law school. He may have finished before, and that's funny. I can't remember exactly.
All right, well, okay.
But the timing is close. I mean, he'd finished college, and he'd gotten into law school, and he may have been interrupted in law school, and then went back in law school and finished and took the bars and Bar Association exams and passed them. And then in the Navy, he was shipped all over the place. He first was flying what we call PBYs. He didn't pilot them, but he was. They were searching out small anti-submarine bases in the Caribbean, and to counteract the German submarines. And so he'd fly different locations and then inspect them, and in some just reject them, and others establish small bases from which PBYs and other anti-submarine devices could patrol and drop bombs on. Even those old rickety PBYs, if you remember, they used to call them flying ducks or something like that. And they look so ungainly. They're very slow, but a submarine, you don't need a fighter, a bomber, or a dive bomber even to bomb submarines, and they could stay out and had long range. And anyway, so they were anti-submarine things. Then he was in the North Atlantic on a small Jeep carrier, they called him, aircraft carrier. And the supply officer there, he didn't fly, but that was terrible duty. It was in the winter time, and the North Atlantic is very inhospitable. Also has submarines in it, and but they did some work there and then he was out in the Pacific Theater off of Okinawa at the end of the Japanese War. So he saw action there and saw the suicide bombers dive bomb from the Japanese airplanes to try to knock out the Pacific Fleet who were attacking Okinawa in preparation for attacking Japan. And then he was discharged. The one war ended, and then the other war ended. And at one time during that a period of did I tell you about the meeting that we had? Gene and I were in Salt Lake City, and that was before Diane was born. And we had an apartment in Salt Lake City, and I was working at the Lincoln Army Air Base as a sergeant, and classifying and processing. Maybe this is a repeating. Am I?
I don't remember this story.
Okay. And we were, Gene and I were there, and it was the winter time, and suddenly Chad and Babsy didn't appear, but they said they were on their way out to Salt Lake City, and he'd been reassigned to a huge ammunition supply depot about 10 or 15 miles north of Salt Lake City, and was going to be there an indefinite period of time because they had to get their ammunition. For some reason or other, they set it way inland so that if the Japanese ever attacked the Pacific coast, I guess, they didn't want this depot, a huge supply place for ammunition, battleships and bombs for aircraft and so on. So anyway, they had an inspection by then Vice President Harry Truman, came out and inspected, and Brother Chud went around with him on this inspection.
Okay.
So he got to meet Harry Truman
Wow.
before he became president, and not closely, but it was just an interesting contact. In addition, we tried to go skiing while we were out there. We didn't have our skis, boots, or anything, but we could rent. You could rent skis and equipment, and all four of us liked to ski. And 2 or 3 times we tried to, on a weekend. We usually had the weekends off, and we tried to go back to Alta, a very famous old ski resort in the mountains, the Wasatch Mountains of Utah, and the four of us, and we had a lot of fun. But we did actually. They'd have avalanches. Had a lot of avalanches in these canyons leading back to the ski area, and so we went out in a state park, a local park, just outside of Salt Lake City, and I have some pictures, photographs of the four of us having fun, just fooling around on skis on this park in Little Hills. And we had a big reunion when they first arrived. We went to the top deck of the Hotel Utah, and that wasn't in the winter time, so it was outdoors. So that they were there, a period of months, so that it encompassed both part of a winter and part of a summer. And we had a bottle of champagne that they brought out. And, we were going to open it, and this it was a very old bottle, I guess. That we're not big champagne drinkers, and they tried to open this bottle, and the waiter couldn't get it open, and he was shaking it up, I guess, a lot at the time. And people were ducking down underneath the table, thinking it was going to explode and go off. And finally, we never did get it open, and we took it back to the room afterward and put a towel over the neck of the bottle and broke the glass over the sink, and we had enjoyed that and had fun. Then the Army and Navy found out that 2 brothers and their 2 wives were reunioning, and that was too good a thing to let happen, and they shipped both of us out in opposite directions. Judd went to the Pacific. I went to Lincoln Army Airfield in Nebraska.